Hello, this is Jim Lane, the mayor of the city of Scottsdale. I'm here again to talk to the citizens of Scottsdale and give them some greater enlightenment as to what their city is doing with regard to our progress with COVID-19 and the abatement or the tamping down of the curve and where we are in the next phase of things as we're going forward. But right now, I'm honored to have Chief Rodbell here with us. And Chief Rodbell has been 44 years in law enforcement and public safety, 17 of those years right here in Scottsdale. And he has become a major fixture in how we handle our directives and the actions that we need to take to continue to work our way through COVID-19 in a safe way. So, welcome, Chief. Nice to have you here. Oh, I probably should say that you have a bachelor's degree in criminology and a master's degree in education. And I think the reason that it's good for me to just mention that for sure is that they both come into play in your work today and through this contagion. I'm talking about criminology as well as education, Chief, just to let you know.
Well, thanks for making me feel so old. They've got. It's a great thrill to be here. I really appreciate you doing these videos, and I thank you for including me in them. It gives me a chance to talk directly about this particular issue and how the PD is handling it. And I couldn't be more proud of how well we've been doing during this difficult, challenging time. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Chief, absolutely, and your entire staff. I know that it is a difficult time, and sometimes it's particularly difficult in your area of things, in maintaining a safe environment and what we have to deal with on an added basis of your normal activities. And to that point, oh, I'm sorry, did you want to say something on that?
I was just going to say that one of the things I've been most proud of is that men and women have been showing up and they've been hitting the streets, they've been answering the calls, and all the calls are down, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a second, but they've been answering the calls for service, going where they need to go and doing what they need to do, and they remained a healthy workforce. I'm really proud of that, is that we've instituted a few things that kind of keep social distancing even as we come to work, but at the same time doing what needs to be done, and they've been doing a great job. My command staff has done a great job of leading us through this crisis, and the department has been very responsive to what they need to do. So thank you. Appreciate
Well, very good. But along those lines, and certainly it probably has some reflection on what you just said, but how would you see what the impact has been to the police department and your folks in general with their interaction with the community, as well as the type of things that they're now faced with that they may not have been before before the COVID-19 contagion and all that we've had to affect?
We're doing things a little differently. Almost immediately, we decided to change some of our responses and how we respond. And so literally we took a look at calls for service and we said, we don't have to be the first car on the scene and inside a residence where the call for service is an ill person, a medical call. Clearly a fall, a heart attack, stroke, those kinds of things where we're choking, those kinds of things we'd respond to immediately and be the first to the door. But if it was something came out of someone who was ill, in the past we would be one of the first responders, perhaps before the ambulance or fire crew could get there. But now we basically took up sort of a backseat stance and said, let's get the fire department here. They're better skilled, better trained, better equipped to deal with ill persons. And then we need to go in, we would go in. And so we immediately changed our response protocols just to make sure that our workforce was kept healthy. Like I said, it didn't stop us from going in on emergency calls, but just on ill person calls. And then we changed the way we deliver services. We're doing it through Windows now. We're doing it by appointment now. And that's been unusual for us because typically anybody who just wants to walk into a building, they just walk into our building and we deal with whatever the issue might be. Of course, emergencies are still emergencies. Nothing changes. But the day-to-day business of getting your property or evidence back, or getting, having a meeting regarding some issue that you want to try to resolve, we're just changing the way we do business. We're doing a lot over the telephone now. I'm constantly in these 18 meetings where we're doing things by video. My travel time's cut down considerably, but we're constantly doing those meetings this way. And that's a little different for us. We like the personal touch of being able to see folks, to talk to folks, but we're just changing the way we do business. At the same time, service delivery hasn't changed at all.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned a couple things in there that seem to run a little bit of a common thread throughout some of the city personnel and how they're approaching things. Not necessarily specifically in law enforcement, but a different strategy, a different approach, but even sometimes pivoting in the use of technology to sort of overcome some of what might have been seen in the past as a way we'd like to incorporate some efficiencies into things, but really just hadn't gotten into it. You were talking about even as a telephone call versus, running out to it or this or that. But the first element you said, I think is particularly poignant because I know that the police department generally is on patrol, available, and out there. So it's almost a standoff a little bit in some instances, I would presume. And I know that our fire department is very prompt on that, but they're at stations and they're coming out where a police officer might be on a scene.
Yeah, we've actually tried to encourage as much as possible a connection with the community, and we've encouraged our officers to continue, our philosophy of delivery of services through community policing. And a lot of that is face-to-face contact and being responsive. And so we've asked our officers to not lose that completely, but just the nature of the business and the way we're doing it today, you lose a little bit of that. Dealing with people with a telephone or dealing with people over some other platform, it makes it difficult to relate sometimes. You've held council meetings, and your council meetings have been by telephone. You don't get to see what the other council members, how they're reacting or some of the messages they've been sending, or the fact they even want to speak up. You got to wait to be called on. It's the same thing for us. My staff meetings have been by video, those that participate by video, but mostly it's over the phone line. And so you don't get the feel for whether the messages are coming across, how it's being received, it being acknowledged, and it just makes that kind of communication a bit more strained. And so the same thing between us and citizens. And so when we respond to a call, it's much better to be in person. So we've encouraged our officers to continue to have that contact. Calls for services are down. They're down everywhere. This is not unusual, and it's not particular to Scottsdale. But our calls for service, citizen-generated calls for service, where citizens call us, was down about 30% on the average over the last month and a half. We're starting to see it come back a little bit. My most recent statistics from May tell me we're down about 19% down. So that's a little bit of a comeback. It's still not where I would like it to be. I would like to have our citizens that fully engage with us and us fully engage with them when it comes to just contacts on the street. So traffic citations are down, as you can imagine. It hasn't been a lot of traffic, but we have seen traffic speeds increasing. It's just some unreasonable speeds and some dangerous speeds. And we're going to start having to go out there again and kind of rein some of that in as traffic starts coming back. If you've noticed, but now we're in the middle of May, we're starting to see more and more traffic on the street already this week as opposed to last week, and more last week than the week prior. So people are starting to come out again, which is good. At the same time, we have to reel in some of those behaviors we've gotten away with recently in terms of our, speeding our traffic, zones.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned there too that I think is worth reiterating a little bit, and that's the personal touch, the personal connection between law enforcement and our citizens, particularly at this time. So the efforts to try to maintain a little bit of that or to continue that in spite of the fact that we need to stand down a little bit, or when I talk about from the standpoint of social distancing and maybe even a mask, there's elements of personal contact that are lost. And when people are already frightened about things that are unrelated to the police department, they get a little edgier, and it just becomes a little bit more of an issue, which does bring up another question I had and wanted to talk to you about, and that is one of the tougher things that I think, and again, I'm not in the law enforcement myself, and certainly have not been, but one of the things that becomes a little bit of an issue is when, given a situation as we have with COVID-19, the contagion, and the efforts that we have employed in shutdown and other personal habits and staying at home and not being available to go to certain amenities and this and that, is that we have individuals who sometimes use the directives and the guidance to call the police upon their neighbors. Do you see much of that? And I mean, that kind of thing happens, it doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. I just wondered if there's much of that right now. In other words, using the system to sort of become more sensitized to any difficulty they might have with a particular neighbor or otherwise. Any of that? And what I was going to ask, I suppose, some people are calling the police department to report on somebody else, and then of course sometimes people are calling the police department. I'm sorry, that's one and the same thing. But anyway, that you know what I'm talking about, that kind of interaction.
Yeah. So I never really can get into people's motives for why they call. I will tell you, there's been a lot more phone calls from individuals complaining about things that they've either observed or they have had contact with others that were part of the social distancing concerns, gatherings, family gatherings concerns, and so we've seen an uptick in those kinds of calls. And I'm not too sure what the motivations are. The fact that some people really are concerned about the fact that one of the ways to spread this virus is through social contacts with very close quarters, and then contacting additional others in the future from there. So the spread is the concern. And so I will tell you that when the governor's orders came out, there was a concern about how the police would react to that. You and I had a conversation very early on, and you gave very clear direction that you did not want to see the police department become a police department that was constantly in contact with the citizens and charging citizens with violations of that you wanted to get us, and we wanted to get our community into compliance. And the vast majority, Mayor, of the citizens, they recognize that need to be in compliance, and sometimes we gave gentle reminders, and they reacted positively to those gentle reminders. We had very few reasons why we had to go the next step to citing somebody or charging someone with a violation of opening their business or having a gathering larger than they should have. And those were usually the ones that were just flagrant. They were ignoring us. They did it several times. They didn't respond, and then we had to say, okay, we've come enough. We have to bring a point, and the courts will decide what to do with those charges in the future. But for the most part, we did have a lot of citizens calling, saying they were observing things. They were concerned about gatherings, again, larger than a certain number that was allowed at the time, or even open businesses. And I think some of that was out of concern to keep the spread down, and maybe some people took advantage of it. We may never know which ones took advantage of it, which ones were acting appropriately, but some of them their hearts were in the right place. It just put us in a very awkward position, as you can imagine, law enforcement going out and telling people, break up the party, you're not distanced close enough, close your business down. I mean, it puts us in a really awkward position because we want businesses to do well and thrive in our city. Businesses are what make this city a great city, and the fact that people enjoy themselves and they enjoy socializing here, enjoy going out to restaurants and clubs and movies and all the things that you and I enjoy. We want to make sure that people do that and do it safely. And so we were put in an awkward position, and now we're in an awkward position again, as you can imagine, as businesses open up and more and more people start taking advantage of the fact that businesses are reopening. What position law enforcement has now to go in and say, okay, these tables are too close. And so as the governor's order, as it comes to sunset, these are all recommendations. And so as a department, if someone calls us, if we do feel we need to respond to the complaint, we're just going to tell people, look, again, this is a suggestion to keep us all healthy. Love compliance, but the reality is that there really, once the governor's order sees sunset, there really is no more violation. Yeah. And so we just ask people just to use a little common sense so this thing doesn't reoccur. We don't find ourselves backtracking, going back to where the governor has to put out an order again and close businesses again and put us in the same position we were before. Just hoping people just use a little common sense during this period.
No, and a great response, and frankly, I'd even have to say better than the question in the sense that really, and I'm certainly personally aware of people that have contacted my office and myself with regard to situations that they thought were potentially threatening under the circumstances of the regulations, or I should say the guidelines and the recommendations coming from the governor's office with regard to COVID-19. I mentioned earlier the fact that you had a undergraduate degree in criminology and a master's degree in education. And the reason I said, I'll get to that, and the reason why that was important is just exactly by virtue of your answer. I think it was a very interesting and sensitive, but at the same time sensible kind of assessment of sort of the psychology of it, but also in trying to instruct people and to solicit their compliance rather than to come down hard. And that's something you and I have talked about a fair amount from the get-go. One other thing that you were talking about is you started out real early on, and I always thought this was a fantastic element of what your thinking was with regard to the businesses that were going to be put into a position of shutting down. But going and talking to those businesses, having your officers go and talk to those businesses and get around, this is really much earlier on, sort of create that contact at the front end as best you could to realize that, we're in this situation. I think as you explained it, and we want to be here for you, but, at the same time, this is what we're going to be dealing with. Just sort of leveling with them and speaking frankly to them. And I think that helped an awful lot. And I don't know what all the components are that make it help, but voluntary compliance is made up of a lot of things, and one of them is trust, and certainly trust in law enforcement. So I think that's a great answer. And as I said, I think your background on all levels is something that lent to some really good direction for your staff. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mayor. My master's is in education. It's in guidance and counseling. So I'm eligible or qualified to be a elementary school counselor, but I thought it was too dangerous. So I went into law enforcement.
Very good. I appreciate that. Well, it was probably a good move.
But thank you for your comments. I'm very, very proud of the men and women. They did get out. They did communicate. That's one thing about this organization. We do a great job of outreach and communication with our community, and they know we're in this as a partnership with our community. Our success is their success, and vice versa. We want this to be a very healthy community of businesses that people want to come to, spend time in, enjoy themselves, and have great memories, and then come back. And that's one thing Scottsdale can pride itself in. Years that I've been here. In fact, my wife and I visited here when we were kids. When we were early married, back in the 1980s, we used to vacation here because we loved this city. And for me to have the opportunity to actually work here was actually literally a dream come true for us. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad you were able to make that transition and be here with us for nearly the entire time that I've been in the office as well. So it was a great matchup as far as that's concerned. You mentioned something about crime statistics and how, in sort of a general overall sense, they've been down in a lot of categories. Is there any particular, aside from the guidance and trying to work with adherence to some of the guidance and recommendations on COVID-19 policies, is there any area that had any spike up? You mentioned something about speeding, and I know you and I have talked about that, but are there any other areas that went maybe a little bit different direction?
Not really. Some jurisdictions have seen spike ups in family fights and even other kinds of violence. We've not. We've been pretty steady. We have had during this period, unfortunately, a homicide involving a murder-suicide. So we don't know sitting here if it's something to do with this crisis or not, or just something else to do with finances. Which may be related again to the crisis, but for the most part, we've not seen that. We've seen a downturn in burglaries, but don't forget people are home now, right? And businesses aren't really open, so some of that is predictable, but it's also somewhat predictable that we may see a spike coming back up in crime. Right now, our crime rate in the city of Scottsdale is the lowest it's ever been in our history. If you just go back 10 years, we're 10%, actually, I'm sorry, we're 10 points below that. So our crime rate per thousand sits around 22 crimes per thousand residents. And the thing when I talk about crime per resident, you have to understand this. Most communities, okay, you get that, but in our community, we have what 11 to 13 million visitors a year. They don't count in that population number. We have 10,000 come down to our downtown and enjoy the nightlife on our weekends. You don't count that in the per thousand number. So if you think about how incredibly safe this city is, our number is even lower than it's ever been before. I would anticipate a little bit of a spike back to what would be normal as a result of this, people going back to work, businesses up reopening. And so right now we're kind of monitoring that, but we've not seen anything that is so egregious that we're going, oh, as a result of the COVID crisis, these crimes increased in our city. People are hemmed in their houses all day long with their family, can't go anywhere, can't get out. I can appreciate the fact that it's been very, very stressful for families. Well, our city hasn't seen the spike that other places have seen. Again, I think some of it's going to be traffic management, just getting back into the fact that, hey, people are back now. Roads are being used a lot more now. We need to get back to what we all would agree is normal, safe. So no, we haven't really witnessed that, but I do caution us that we need to be careful because that we've dipped so low. We're probably going to have to go back up to what is probably very normal for our city, which is still very low.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that obviously when you're shutting things down, and we're entering into the summer as well, and I know we're talking year over year, season to season kind of thing when you're talking about these stats. But one thing that, one interesting thing, and you probably have already seen this yourself, in the states that have opened up earlier than we have, and have been opened up in some different maybe level of things, but certainly in dining room servicing in the restaurants, there has been a significant recovery, rapid recovery in people getting out. Now, it may have been pent-up demand or otherwise, but given some of the limitations and restrictions, you can understand that to get to 50% of where they were before the COVID contagion, then that's quite a statement, because there was an awful lot of talk, and certainly there still are people who will be reticent to get out and take advantage maybe of dining out again for their own concerns and for their personal health and their own concerns. But just like you're saying with crime, I think there is not a pent-up demand for crime, but nevertheless a pent-up demand for activities and getting out. We're going to see a higher level of activity and maybe back closer to normal conditions, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes obviously it's normal on the bad side. But I think it's going to be very interesting phases that we're going through. And of course, I think the citizens are aware we're following the president's and the governor's three-phase approach to this, and we're in the midst of phase one. And hope that we can hold on to things and understand that there'll be some dust up and that COVID-19's not gone. It's with us. And
yeah,
so,
I think that's what's a concern, Mayor. As you mentioned, I think that it's toes in the water. Some people want to get out. I hear people all the time, they're just tired of home cooking. They want to go to a restaurant. So I can appreciate that. So, it's gonna come back, but I think right now it's still just a little toes in the water. Everybody feels comfortable just yet.
Wait a minute. Now you're saying you're getting tired of home cooking. Is there some reflection domestically here, or?
My wife gonna see this program? Can we cut that part out? Can we edit that? No, I think she's tired of home cooking, quite frankly. So yeah. See, you don't even know. I could be the cook in the family. You don't know that.
Yeah, I know it. That's why I asked. That's why I posed
did.
it just that way. Didn't assume anything. Well, Chief, is there anything else you'd like to share with us with regard to your department, your personnel, the community at large?
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Well, a couple of things. I am very, very proud of how the city government has responded, and certainly how my men and women have responded, and all the positions that we need to have functioning fully to be able to provide public safety to our citizens, our visitors. And they've done a phenomenal job. As I walk around and talk to them, their sense of humor is still there, their morale is still there, they're still showing up to work. We've had an incredibly healthy workforce. I'm hoping we can maintain that healthy workforce as people start getting more comfortable with social engagement. So, but that's really something that we're keeping an eye on. But I'm just very, very proud of, quite frankly, everybody that's been involved in this, because people have done everything they need to do to help all of us get through this crisis. Again, city government itself, your leadership of the council, city manager's leadership, getting us through this has just been phenomenal. And I'm hoping the citizens will start coming back and start being a little more relaxed, but maintain social distance to make sure they stay healthy as well. And we're going to get through this. I hear that from everybody. We're going to get through this. Of course, we're going to get through this. Time passes. It's how we end up on the other side of this. And I'm hoping on the other side of this, we're still the same great city we were going in. And I know we'll be the same great workforce coming out on the other side. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I appreciate the opportunity that I've had the entire time I've been here in Scottsdale. This is something that I've never experienced in 44 years in law enforcement. We've never gone through anything like this before. I was there on the front lines when we had the AIDS pandemic, but it's nothing like this. You know, that wasn't about keeping the kind of social distances that we have in this pandemic. That was about bodily fluids and concerns with those kinds of issues. But this is just different. And I think everyone, certainly in the leadership level, has stood up and done what needs to be done and made the tough decisions that need to be made to get us through. And so I'm very, very proud to be a member of this leadership team and under your guidance and the guidance of the council and the city manager. And I want to thank you for that. And thanks for your support, continued support.
Well, and to the point, certainly, Chief, we're all proud of yourself and your leadership team and your entire law enforcement team. It's really been a very good connection, and it's been a team effort all the way across the board. We've broken down any barriers there might be even between fire and police. No, I'm just teasing. But no.
I'm going to try, but no fire jokes.
Yeah, okay.
I love those guys.
Right. But in any case,
thank you, sir.
It's been great to talk to you, Alan, as always. So thank you very much for taking the time as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.